Hey guys, it's Bella, and in honor of Pride Month, I want to, in this video, teach you guys how to say some modern day queer terms in the Gothic language using quotes from our Gothic Bible. So, let's get right into it. The first quote that I want to read to you is from Paul's first letter to Timothy, chapter 1, verses 8 to 11, and the Gothic reads as follows. Athan vitum thati goth ist vitoth. Jave huas ist vitoa brugith, vitans thati rechtama vitoth nist satith. Ach, vitotha losem, jach untalem, jach unsiviem, jach frauachtem, jach unerknem, jach uswichem. Athans blingwandam, jach ethins blingwandam, manans morthiandam, horam, manans gathiwandam, liugniam, ufarswaram, jach jave hua aliis these helon lesine anstandith, si ist bi evangeli vulthos this odagins gudis thati gatroeth ist mis. So what this means is, however, we know that God is the law. If anyone his law uses, knowing that to a righteous man the law is not set, but to the lawless men and the unaccountable and the sort of reckless, violent, and the sinners and the unholy, and to the wicked and to the unholy, to those killing their fathers and killing their mothers, to those murdering other men, to whores, or to those like sort of prostituting themselves, or to those committing, I should say to those committing adultery, but it's related to the word for whore, to those subjugating themselves to men, to liars, to boasters, and if someone else shall resist anything in this holy teaching or healthy teaching, which is concerning the gospel of the glory of this blessed God, which is entrusted to me. So this is a list St. Paul is giving of all the people for whom the law of God is necessary, and among them we have in the original Greek this word arsenokoites, which literally means to those who are lying with men, arsen being men and koites being lying with. Now what's interesting is the Gothic does not directly or literally mean this. And in fact, this word in Greek, arsenokoites, is one which St. Paul basically had to invent to refer to homosexuals based on the Septuagint version of goodness, of the Old Testament. Septuagint version of the Old Testament, I'm forgetting precisely which verse it is, which says, man shall not lie with man. Deuteronomy, I believe. So St. Paul, using that, coins this word to mean one who lies with men, to refer to homosexuals. The Gothic does not mean that, which shows that the Goths did not have an indigenous word for homosexuals. The way they translate it is with two words, manans gathiwandam, though those subjugating themselves to men or those serving men. Now the connection with service is really interesting, and we will see it later on when we discuss this word theomagos, because it's related with the theo root to gathiwan. So let's go on to talk about this relationship. And the relationship is essentially that in the Greco-Roman world, masters were perceived of as tops and slaves were perceived of as bottoms in crude present-day queer slang. So present-day scholars analyze the ways in which Greco-Roman understandings of sexuality interacted with notions of gender using what Mark Markiston in 2014, among other scholars, has called the Priapic model. So in this model, masculinity is very strongly associated with what in present-day language is referred to as active sexual behavior. So this is penetrating the body of another, and vice versa. So passive sexual behavior, in comparison, is associated with slaves who sort of lacked the power to penetrate for themselves. And in the Christian sense, the worse side of this, or the sort of passive side, came to be associated with the natural world, since through sexual sin, mankind is sort of bound to the natural world, which inevitably dies, as opposed to being bound to the celestial world, which is eternal. And that's why we can see in this 6th century mosaic depicting Christ, we can see him trampling on the forces of nature, the lion and the serpent, respectively, as a symbol of his dominance over the natural world, which to Greco-Romans would have had a degree of sexual connotation. And it seems like this connotation was one shared by the Ostrogoths as well, because of their use of the word theomagos. And I'm going to talk here about this passage from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. And this is one in which Jesus heals the servant of a centurion. And this is one which a few queer Christians have looked to read as implying a sexual relationship between the centurion and the servant, because the Greek word used to describe this servant is hopais, which in some circumstances in Greek literature can refer to a passive homosexual partner, because children were less powerful, and therefore their lack of power was associated with passive sexual behavior, such as being topped. And this reading of the Greek New Testament is contested by many scholars, but I'm going to suggest in this video that in the Gothic Bible, they actually did interpret it this way, meaning that the Gothic translators may have not considered necessarily there to be a sexual relationship between them, but considered that there may have been a possibility of that, and used words which could imply that possibility. So I'll read out this passage for you, and forgive me, it's quite long. So the Gothic reads, Afaroch fan thata inadgangan din ima in Capernaum, duatidia imma hundafats biddians inna jachquithans, froja, theomagos means ligith in garda uslitha, harduva balwiths, jach quath duema Jesus, ik quimans gehelia inna, jach anhafians sa hundafats quath. Froja ni in werths I uppfrot min inganges, ac thatene with warda, jach gehelnith sa theomagos means. Jach ok ik manna havans uppwalfnja minama, gadrochtins jach quithadu thama, gang, jach gangith, jach antarama quim, jach quimith, jach du skalka minama, tauithata, jach toith. Hosjandan san Jesus silvalikava, jach quath duthem afarlestiandam. Amen, quitha isvis, ni in Israela swallothogalovin bigat. Etho quitha isvis, thati manare fram urdusnia, jach sanwa quimand, jach anakumviand myth Abrama, jach Isaka, jach Jakova, in theodangardia himine. Ith the sunius theodangardios usverpanda in requis tata hindumisto. Jenar werthith grects, jach crus dunithwe, jach quath Jesus thama hundafada. Gang, jach swaswega lobides werthethus, jach gehelnorda sa theomagos is in jene huile. So this is a long quote, but I think it's useful to have the context of the story so that we can understand what's going on here, because not all of us will recognize the story of Jesus healing the centurion's servant. So it says, after then that, with him, that's Jesus, with Jesus going into Capernaum, this is a city, a centurion begging him came up to Jesus and asked him, saying, Lord, my servant boy, Theomagos, lies in our house sort of injured or sort of almost at the point of death, he's greatly afflicted balwiths. And Jesus said to him, I, coming, will heal him. And answering then the centurion, he said, Lord, I am not worthy that under my roof you may come, but just say the words, and that servant boy of mine will be healed. Gehelmith will recover. However, I am a man, Manaim, having under my power soldiers, and I say to that soldier, walk, and he walks. And I say to another one, come, and he comes. And I say to my slave, do that, and he does it. Then Jesus, hearing these things, he marveled, and he said to those following after him, Amen, I say to you all, so, I have not found in Israel such faith. However, I say to you all that many are coming from this place Urusna and from Sangwa, and they are reclining with Abraham and with Isaac, and with Isara, and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. However, the true ones of the kingdom will be sort of thrown out into that will I believe this was will will be thrown out into that final darkness. There shall be lamenting and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to that centurion, walk, and just as you believed, it will happen to you. And the servant boy of him recovered in that moment. So this is the story in which Jesus heals the centurion's servant boy, and I've put the Gothic and the Greek words here. This Gothic word roughly meaning homosexual, gathioandam, like being submissive to men, arthenokoites is what it translates in Greek, and the theomagos, which is used in this story, with that same stem, which translates the Greek word boy. So I'm saying that the Greek original doesn't really imply a sexual relationship necessarily between the two, although the Greeks would not have been surprised if there was one. But the Gothic is certainly using words which make that possibility more likely, because one of the other places in which this theo suffix or this theo stem comes up in Gothic is in the word to translate homosexual. So clearly the Goths associated homosexuality or passive homosexuality with servitude in at least some ways. And we've got some art here of Jesus healing the paralytic from a 6th century mosaic in Ravenna. I don't know necessarily that this is the same story as the one that we have just read, but it's nice to have a look at some pretty pictures nonetheless. And I want to talk now about more specific terms, because in the relationship between the centurion and his servant that we talked about earlier, because of the subjugation implicit in the title Theomagos, servant boy, if any homosexual relationship was assumed by Gothic readers of the Bible between the centurion and the servant boy, it would have been assumed that the centurion was the active sexual participant and the servant boy was the passive sexual participant. And in one verse of the Gothic Bible, we actually see that there is maybe some kind of vocabulary to refer to it. And this passage curiously gives us a Gothic word for lesbian, which is very exciting. So this passage is the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 17, lines 33 to 37. And the Gothic reads as follows. It's a riddle that Jesus is telling to his disciples. It reads, Sai sokith sewalasin aganasian, fraquistit ise, Yach sai fraquistit ise in mina ganasieth tho, quitha isvis, that I these nacht, twe werthand anna ligra samin. Ens usnimada, jach antharbillithada. 'Twas werthand malandins samana. Ena usnimada, jach antharbillithada. Jach anhafjandans quethundu ima. Waar, froya, if is quath im, tharilik yen regalisansik arans. So what this means is he who seeks to save his soul, he destroys it. And he who destroys his soul into mine will save it. I say to you all that this night 2 men will end up in bed together. One, or in the same bed. One will be taken away and the other will be left behind. 2 women will wind up grinding together or rubbing together. One woman will be taken away and the other will be left behind. And these are the disciples. Answering, they said to him, Where is this happening, Lord? But he said to them, Where there is flesh, there the eagles will gather themselves. So, I've given you guys the Gothic and the Greek and the Latin side by side so that we can make a comparison. So, this ens and the anthar refers to basically the top and the bottom, because in Greco-Roman concepts of sexuality, bottoming or passive homosexual behavior was what is shameful, and topping was not shameful at all. In fact, it's quite a masculine thing to do. So the man here, from among the 2 men who is transgressing gender norms for his time, who is being shameful, is going to be left behind, and therefore is referred to as anthar, whereas the first one, the top, who will be se usnimada, taken away into the kingdom of heaven, is referred to as ens. And the same thing goes for the women. The ena will be saved and the anthara will be left behind. And this the metaphor of left behind is expressed through the idea of the body. So where there is a body, where there is a corpse, there the eagles will gather. So the idea being that the passive homosexual is left behind, not taken up into heaven, and therefore their body is bound to the natural world, as we saw in this image of Jesus trampling the lion and the serpent as symbols of the natural world. So the passive homosexual remains bound to the natural world and therefore dies a corporeal death and is not taken up into heaven. And by contrast, the active homosexual partner is not sort of transgressing gender norms and therefore is taken up into heaven and will receive eternal life. So what I'm saying is that the Goths may have used ens and anthar and ena and anthara as euphemisms to refer to top and bottoms in Gothic literature, and we actually had a contest for this in the Gothic Discord to see if anyone would be able to realize that from this passage. So by the time this video is out, we'll see if anyone has won it, and I will shout them out in the comments. And this word malanlines, it's related to the word malan in Gothic, which means to grind or to rub. It translates the Greek alethuse, which is those who are grinding, rubbing. And this could crudely be translated with the relatively archaic now English word tribade or tribade, meaning which is an old term for a lesbian. So it's really cool to me that we have a word that seems to basically be referring to lesbian, and the Goths may well have used malandi to refer to a lesbian woman when they encountered one. So absolutely fascinating stuff in this line from John. I want to talk briefly about biblical ideas of marriage and the appropriate relationships between men and women and of gender, because since we have it in the Gothic Bible, of course, it will have influenced the Goths' perception of standard gender roles. We've talked previously in this video about deviations from traditional gender roles specifically for men. And in this passage, we get Jesus laying out to the Pharisees what his vision of the appropriate roles for husbands and wives is. So, the Gothic reads, "Jach jenthro ustandans, quam in marcon Judes, hindar Judeno. Jach gaquemun sic aftra manarins duthama. Jach sue biuchtswas, aftra lesida ins, jach duatgangandans Phariseis frechun inna, scuthus man, when quen absatian, fresandans inna, ith is adhafiandans quath. Qua isvis anaboth Moses, ith isquethun Moses uslobida unsis vocos afsetsatines melian jach afletan. Jach andhafians Jesus quath duem, vithra hardu hertin iswarda, camelida isvis tho anabusen. Ith af anastodin nega skaftes, gumin jach quinin gatawida guth. Enoch fes, belithe manna atin sinama jach ethin sine, jach siena tho twa du leka samin. Swaswe thanasits nisin twa, ac lik en, thati nu guthgawath, mana thama niskeve, jach in garda aftra siponiosis, bithata samo frechun ina, jach quath duem. Sahwa such sai afletith quen sina, jach liugeth antara, horinoth du thise, jach jave quino afletith avansinana, jach liugada antarama horinoth. So this long passage, what does it mean? It says, and there too, standing up, he came, this is Jesus, into the boundary of Judea, beyond the river Jordan, and they came, they sort of gathered again, a great crowd to him. And just as the custom was, after he had taught them, and with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees coming up to him, they asked him. So after Jesus taught, the Pharisees came up to him and asked him, what they asked was, is it necessary for a man to put aside his wife, or is it allowed for a man to divorce his wife? Asking him. But Jesus, or he, answering them, said, what did Moses bid you or command to you? And they said, Moses allowed us to write books of, or words of setting aside, and to set aside, and to abandon wives. And Jesus answering them said to them, he wrote that commandment against your hard-heartedness. However, God made mankind and womankind from the beginning of creation. And on account of this, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and they shall those two shall be in a single body together. Just as thereafter there are no longer two, but there is one body, that which God has now made. Sorry, that and that which God has now joined, Gawath, may no man separate that, referring to that one body that they were joined into. And his disciples in the house afterwards asked him about that same thing, or they asked him again. And Jesus said to them, whoever who abandons his wife and marries another commits adultery with or against the first wife. And if a woman abandons her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. So this is the verse where Jesus is outlining that adultery is wrong and not permitting remarriage, and presumably the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, they definitely would have had this as a tenant, and they would not have allowed remarriage. There's probably can be found in Visigothic law commandments against this, although when it came to royalty, they managed to find ways around it by saying that the marriage was never really there, that it was just therefore annulled rather than truly broken up. But we can see here this idea, which the Goths would have therefore inherited, that separation of the sexes and gender roles was created from the beginning of creation, and there is an implication in this passage, arguably, that marriage between couples was sort of planned by God from the beginning. The theology of that is much more complicated. The short of it is that patristic authors did not consider heterosexual marriage to be unsinful. It's just a lesser form of sin. But that's going to be a topic for a future video because it's brilliant and I can't go into it here, unfortunately. And I wanted to end on my favorite line from the Gothic Bible, and it's a line which the Goths probably would have put a lot of stock in because they themselves were trying to break through ethnic divisions, ethnic boundaries, and integrate themselves into Italian and Spanish society. And this line, I'm sure, would have been very comforting for them trying to do so, even in the face of resistance from Roman orators such as Magnus Felix and Odius. So this line from Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 28, it reads, Nist Judeos nich Grecs, nist Skalks nich Fris, nist Gomacund nich Quinacund, unte alle jus ensiuth in Christo Jesu. So, there is no Jew nor Greek. There is no slave nor free man. There is no male gender or female gender, because you all are one in Christ Jesus. So this is a very endearing line. I think it's very, good moral message to bear in mind. And this gives us a really interesting evidence that Goths may have had sort of words to refer to gender specifically, because one could simply translate this line, which originally said man and woman, as guma and quino, like man and woman. These are the terms in Gothic. But the adding of the suffix kund, which you can roughly translate as kind, so mankind and womankind, shows that Goths are maybe that the Goths maybe had terminology to talk about genders beyond individual men and women, which is interesting to think about. So, some conclusions to this video. Firstly, the Goths and the Visigoths probably conceived of their own sexualities according to the priapic model, which associated topping with masculine dominance and vice versa. Second of all, the associations of the word theomagos, translating the Greek hopais, with servitude and therefore passive sexual activity, it invites a queer reading of Mark's Gospel, which is further suggested by the use of the verb gatheuans, related to the theos component of theomagos, to translate the Greek word arthenokoites, which is homosexual. Penultimately, the Goths may have described tops as the ens or enna and bottoms as the antara when talking about same-sex relationships. And lastly, the word malandi can be roughly translated as tribad in archaic English to mean a lesbian woman, and it's literally a sort of grubbing or a rubbing or a grinding woman in Gothic. So that's all I have for today. That this has hopefully taught you a few how to say gay and top and bottom in a couple of ways, and lesbian in Gothic. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe. If you want to get tuition from me, if you want me to teach you Latin or Gothic or manuscript skills or anything like this, I have a Patreon where that is a privilege of certain tiers, and you may get a link to it on my channel, and it'll be in the description to this video, and you can sign up there. Other than that, happy Pride Month to absolutely everyone, both in the Gothic community and without. And I hope you all have an excellent day, And yes, into the next video. Bye.